One thing that I really love in a story is the ability for the author to foreshadow the things that are going to happen in the end of the story. This, other than making for a really fun reread whenever you can see all the things that you missed on your first read, shows me also that the author put a lot of care and effort into their work, making sure that they took the time to plan out the plot and structure of the novel. Now, there are masters at this. I think Charles Dickens is the first author that comes to mind. When you reread some of his work, he just does a great job with all the callbacks and the little hints that he puts in there about how the story was going to end up. I think Jo Rowling is actually another great example of someone who is very, very good at this kind of work. Honestly, I think that this is actually one of the best things that she does in her writing. She plans out the whole story beforehand and puts little hints in there of where the story is going. Anton Chekhov is maybe the classic example though, giving his famous example of the gun on the fireplace mantle. Meaning that if you call the reader's attention to something, then it should be brought back up in a meaningful way. Now, I don't fully agree that things like that should always be brought up, because that kind of makes for rather economical writing rather than immersive writing. But all this to say that I am a sucker for a good forehead smacking moment where you just go, I should have seen that coming. And JRR Tolkien isn't someone I would usually have thought of that does this all that much. He's a much more detail-focused author, who I feel like incorporates so much into his novels that he can't really ever call things back in the same, ferocity that others do, because he just puts so much in there. But as I was reading the Flotsam and Jetsam chapter, or Flotsam and Jetsam, I don't know how to pronounce that, where Merry and Pippin are meeting up with Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli again in Isengard, and they finally have their reunion, and they talk about all their tales, and there's just so much good stuff in that chapter. There's also this callback to previous things that he wrote, and I was pretty astounded by the amount of callbacks that there were. So what I want to do in this essay is go through a few of them that I saw in this chapter that were kind of mysteries to me when they happened in that moment that Tolkien kind of made callbacks to in this chapter. And the first one is less of a callback and more like a wholesome prophecy that he was fulfilling here. But before I go on, make sure you like the video and subscribe. I am reading through Lord of the Rings for the first time and publishing video essays about my first time read through. If that sounds something that you would be into, then go check out the channel. I am planning to do a lot of other really great books and series as the years and months go on too, so you can also become a member for members only content as well as early access to these videos. But anyway, Aragorn is the first callback that I want to talk about. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday in the essay then, but he has this line that I always kind of was crushed whenever I read it. It's in the Fellowship of the Ring when he said, "A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship." And I think he's found friendship from that point in the Fellowship, but he's mainly either had to be the leader, or to chase orc, or to fight in a war. He's not really had a time where he can sit down and just enjoy a good meal with friends. Not since Rivendell, at least. And I think this idea for Aragorn is just tragic, but also something that shows his character's desire. Not necessarily his motivation, but I think this moment right here is almost like the fulfillment of the prophecy that Aragorn said in The Prancing Pony. Because this moment right here is when Aragorn seems to find rest and true friends. It's the first time in these books that I really remember where Aragorn can relax. He's surrounded by the friends he's been chasing and trying to find. And so when he meets them, he's overjoyed and just wants to eat a meal and hear their story. And it's great because all this serious business is going around him, and Aragorn should probably be in the center of that business. But he's not. He's choosing here in this moment to be with friends rather than deal with some of the serious business that needs to go on in Isengard. And I just love that for him. The second moment is a really sweet moment where Pippin struggles with something. Now, this was a callback to the chapter a few chapters ago when Pippin describes the eyes of Treebeard. In that chapter, it's like a flash forward, where Tolkien comes out of the story to explain how Pippin would, in the future, describe the eyes of Treebeard to all who wanted to hear. This is what the book said. These deep eyes were now surveying them, slow and solemn, but very penetrating. They were brown, shot with a green light. Often afterwards, Pippin tried to describe his first impression of them. And this is a quote that you get from Pippin. One felt as if there was an enormous well behind them, filled up with ages of memory and long, slow, steady thinking. But their surface was sparkling with the present, like sun shimmering on the outer leaves of a vast tree, or on the ripples of a very deep lake. I don't know, but it felt as if something that grew in the ground, asleep, you might say, or just feeling itself as something between root tip and leaf tip, between deep earth and sky, had suddenly waked up, and was considering you with the same slow care that it had given to its own inside affairs for endless years. And it's beautiful because in this current chapter in Flotsam and Jetsam, you can see how Pippin lacks the words to be able to describe them. He's not done the thinking and processing through this. And this is what the book says. Many strange tales have been told about that land, said Aragorn. I have never entered it. Come, tell me more about it. And about the Ents. Ents, said Pippin. Ents are... well, Ents are all different for one thing. But their eyes are very odd. He tried a few fumbling words that trailed off into silence. Oh well, he went on. You have seen some at a distance already. They saw you at any rate, and reported that you were on the way. And you will see many others, I expect, before you leave here. You must form your own ideas. I love here that you get an inside scoop into the trouble that Pippin has been having trying to describe these eyes. You know that he's just been thinking about this a lot, and is likely a perfectionist growing up frustrated that he can't describe them. But it makes me happy that he, later becomes a poet and really thinks of a good way to describe these eyes. It also shows his enthusiasm just to be out here and having adventures in these parts of the world. I also feel like this was kind of Tolkien's description of writing, and specifically song and poetry. It's things like that you must struggle through. I, won't really have inspiration strike you in the moment for things like this. I feel like that happens kind of very rarely. Most of the time, if you want to describe something in a poetic way, it just takes time to actually get the feeling that you had conveyed through words. And poetry feels oddly similar to that, where you write a draft and realize it's not at all what you meant, and then you hone in and you get closer and closer and closer, and by draft 100, you realize, you're way off, and you crinkle that up, throw it in the trash, go back to the drawing board. And eventually you might get a little flash out of what, that feeling was like. And I think that's what Pippin feels like he's doing here. And it's I think it's a simple and a beautiful moment where he is just kind of honing in on the words that he says. And he finally gets them later when he can actually describe what the tree's eyes were, or what the Ents' eyes were to his friends. Now, the next is a simple moment that I don't quite understand yet. And I think this has to be some kind of hint coming up later. But the swords that Merry and Pippin have come back in this chapter. I didn't even know, but Aragorn was carrying them for the hobbits. These were the swords that they got at the graves of the Barrow-wights, or I guess that the Barrow-wights inhabited. But this is what the book says. Here are some treasures that you let fall, said Aragorn. You will be glad to have them back. He loosened his belt from under his cloak and took from it 2 sheathed knives. Well, said Merry, I never expected to see those again. I marked a few orcs with mine, but Ugluk took them from us. How he glared. At first I thought he was going to stab me, but he threw the things away as if they burned him. Now, my question, why did they burn this orc? There is something else to these blades that I feel like I haven't discovered yet. Maybe they didn't burn him, maybe there was just, Merry and Pippin's description of it. But my guess at the moment, and I think I'm guessing this too because I've seen a few comments here and there that say these swords kind of play a role in the end of the book somewhere, is that the orcs can't touch these because they are some kind of ancient blades. And maybe this actually has something to do with killing or stabbing the ring wraith, because in the movie, Merry stabs the Witch King. Perhaps in the book, it's even better and he stabs it with this blade, and maybe only that blade could penetrate the armor of the Witch King because he put a curse on the Barrow in that land and they got, the blade, and the blade wants revenge or something like that. I don't really know. But I just really like the callback and the mystery behind these blades. It is very cool stuff to me. The next thing I want to talk about is Tolkien's use of the Southerners in the town of Brie and how that made a comeback here. I actually kind of forgot all about that passage, so my note in this book was just a big huh, because I was just confused at this. And I had to ask some people on our Discord about this, but this is the passage that they gave me to kind of jog my memory about it. So thank you guys for your help. You guys are honestly the best. This is what it says. The local hobbits stared in amazement, and then sprang to their feet and shouted for Barlaman. All the company drew away from Pippin and Sam, who found themselves left alone in a corner, and eyed darkly and doubtfully from a distance. It was plain that many people regarded them now as the company of a traveling magician of unknown powers and purpose. But there was one swarthy Brielander, who stood looking at them with a knowing and half-mocking expression that made them feel very uncomfortable. Presently he slipped out of the door, followed by the squint-eyed southerner. The two had been whispering together a good deal during the evening. And then, a few pages later, you get this. "I do," said Strider. "The Black Breath. The riders must have left their horses outside and passed through the south gate in secret. They will know all the news now, for they have visited Bill Ferny, and probably that southerner was a spy as well. Something may happen in the night before we leave Brie." And then after that, a few pages later, you get this. "So that's where that southerner is hiding," he thought. "He looks more than half like a goblin." Which is really fascinating. I kind of passed over that part really quick when I was in that Brie chapter, but this is what you get in the current chapter. "He emptied Isengard. I saw the enemy go, endless lines of marching orcs, and troops of them mounted on great wolves. And there were battalions of men too. Many of them carried torches, and in the flare I could see their faces. Most of them were ordinary men, rather tall and dark-haired, and grim, but not particularly evil-looking. But there were some others that were horrible, man-high, but with goblin faces, sallow, leering, squint-eyed. Do you know, they remind me at once of that southerner at Brie, only he was not so obviously orc-like as most of these were." Now, I guess it's a small bit of foreshadowing, but I just find it so interesting how even in Brie, Tolkien was prepping us for these moments, giving us hints of what was to come and the creatures that we would run into, so that we wouldn't totally be lost by the time we got there. And then another one, I have my answer for what was that darkness and movement in the previous chapter where they were sleeping and all of a sudden this rush of trees came at them, or rush of mist or darkness kind of. And don't worry, because I've got a whole different essay that I'm going to write about the Huorns, specifically because they're so cool. I don't really know how to pronounce that yet. I gotta look that up on Google or something. But in this passage, it kind of confused me in the previous chapter. This is what the previous chapter said. "A mist gathered about them. Above them, a few stars still glimmered faintly, but on either side there arose walls of impenetrable gloom. They were in a narrow lane between moving towers of shadow. Voices they heard, whisperings and groanings, and an endless rustling sigh. The earth shook under them. Long it seemed to them that they sat there and were afraid. But at last the darkness and rumor passed, and vanished between the mountain's arms." Now, I was so confused at that in the last chapter. But now I think there's clarity on it in the current chapter, and again, it's brilliant that he does callbacks to things at the beginning, and then things just happen in the previous chapter. It's like he's doing these callbacks in every single way. Long form ones, short form ones. He is just such a satisfying writer in that fashion. But this is the passage that cleared things up for me in this chapter. And it says, "It was the Huorns, or Huorns, or so the Ents call them in short language. Treebeard won't say much about them, but I think they are Ents that have become almost like trees, at least to look at. They stand here and there in the wood or under its eaves, silent, watching endlessly over the trees. But deep in the darkest dales," deep in the darkest dales, that's a fun one, "there are hundreds and hundreds of them, I believe. There is a great power in them, and they seem able to wrap themselves in shadow. It is difficult to see them moving, but they do. They can move very quickly, if they are angry. You stand still looking at the weather maybe, or listening to the rustling of the wind, and then suddenly you find that you are in the middle of the wood with a great groping trees all around you. They still have voices, and can speak with the Ents. That is why they are called Huorns," Treebeard said. "But they have all become queer and wild. Dangerous. I should be terrified of meeting them, if there were no true Ents about to look after them." Okay, so number one, I cannot wait to write about that. And number two, that kind of clears up the previous chapter that they ran into some Huorns, I guess, coming back from destroying the orc near Helm's Deep. That's kind of my guess. But it's a great callback, and again, can't wait to write about that. And then the last one I want to talk about is the pipeweed that the freaking hornblowers are selling to Saruman. Are you kidding me? There's a section in the preface called Concerning Pipeweed that says this. This, he says, is the one art that we certainly claim to be our own invention. When hobbits first began to smoke is not known. All the legends and family histories take it for granted. For ages, folk in the Shire smoked various herbs, some fouler, some sweeter. But all accounts agree that Tobold Hornblower of Longbottom in the South Farthing first grew the true pipeweed in his gardens in the days of Isengrim II, about the year 1070 of Shire reckoning. The best homegrown still comes from that district, especially the varieties now known as Longbottom Leaf, Old Toby, and Southern Star. Now, this is bizarre to me. Isengrim sounds a lot like Isengard. Was Isengard an old son of Isengrim? Is there an alliance between the Hornblowers and between Isengard? I think, and this will likely be its own speculative essay maybe later this week, but that chapter maybe everyone talks about, which I've only heard about, the Scouring of the Shire, is maybe all about this? Like the cleaning up of this kind of industry from the Shire? I don't know really anything about that yet, and I don't want to speculate that much, so please no spoilers in the comments, but all that to say, I just really like the callback to the Shire. It was lovely just to get back into the hobbits' minds. I think that they and the dwarves are my favorite, but I truly love the hobbits in these books, and I cannot wait to get back to Sam and Frodo and see all that they are up to. So this was just a simple essay to kind of just point out some of the cool foreshadowings and the callbacks that I think were present in this chapter. It was one of my favorites of the entire book so far. I love this one so much. So just make sure you like the video, subscribe, become a member, and I'll see you in the next one.